Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So I just wanted to make a quick video to notify you of a very rare astrological transit that is taking place this week from the 15th to 24th, but particularly hitting its peak from the 19th to 20th of July. And this is called the Barbault basket. Now this is named after a French astrologer called Barbault. Now, he was a mundane astrologer, which means that he did not analyze birth charts and natal astrology. He looked at big picture events, so a economic catastrophe, a planetary cycle that really affected something like a major earthquake. So he really looked at the way that our society and our world was moving rather than how our personality was affected. So why this is really rare is because we've never had this configuration before, and I feel like 2026 has been a lot of us talking about this is super rare, you know, for this Mars, Uranus conjunction Gemini, and we don't have this very often, but this is pretty much rare in the fact that I don't think we've ever had it, okay? So it's a cluster of outer planets that form what look like a shopping basket. So you have Jupiter in Leo, and that's opposite Pluto in Aquarius, and then you have a cluster of sextiles and trines, which are harmonious aspects to Neptune, Aries, and Uranus and Gemini, and they go back and forth with each other. And the really great thing is that Saturn is not in the mix, so Saturn's not bringing a load of like constriction and boundary. This is actually pretty positive. Jupiter is the only traditional planet in this mix, but if you know anything about astrology, modern planets do have their place. If you're a traditional astrologer, you might be like, no, they don't. I am more of a traditional astrologer, and yet I cannot deny the effects of Uranus. I just can't, okay? So, one reason why I've not really paid a lot of attention to this particular transit or given it the kind of like, oh my God, it's so hyped up that other astrologers have is because I think we already know what this is going to do. We're already in the movement. So it's said that this particular transit is going to usher us into close enough utopia. Now, we can never achieve utopia, just as we can never achieve dystopia, because the yin and yang of the universe does not allow for that. So what instead it's going to do is push us to reform and restructure and basically enter a new era through a re-architecture. Okay, let's look at the fundamental qualities of these planets in these signs. So let's start with Jupiter and Leo. We have a planet of abundance and wisdom, growth and learning and teaching in a very fiery sign. And it's also important to note that these are only fire and air signs that this transit is taking place with. So fire is creation and passion, and air is logic and understanding. So mental thinking. So bring this together, we're using our, intellect and our, fundamental understanding of how technology works right now to push us towards something that's passionate. We're creating. So Leo is very main character, but it's also about creation. It's typically associated with fifth house qualities, which is children, creativity, getting out your comfort zone, and really being victorious, being very positive. Leo is ruled by the sun, so this is positivity. Now, when this is opposite something like Pluto in Aquarius, which we know is about innovation and transformation by any means necessary, and in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn, and in modern astrology, Uranus, we are innovating from traditional structures, the opposition means that at first you get angry and then you get better. So there is going to be some tension to push us towards that new era. And I don't think we know that we're going to wake up and everything's going to be seamless and everything is amazing and suddenly you get free healthcare. But I do think that it's going to allow us to stand up and say, why am I doing this? Why are we being so passive? I live in the UK where you could, I don't know if you've ever seen that episode of Sherlock where he's like, can I flick your face? And he's like that, it's literally like that. And you just don't do anything, you don't bite back. And I think that's really interesting when it comes to this basket and how that affects each individual country too. So we've got that opposition. And then you've got Neptune Aries, which is very foggy, and it's really about the disillusionment of creation, like where can we create, but we feel that we can't, we feel that we've been misled. Uranus in Gemini, giving us technological innovation with AI, and how is that good or bad, and why is it that we don't see AI doing anything really positive for the world, instead it's just being used to create AI images of people in sport kissing each other, and it's like, this is weird, right? So I do think that this cluster is going to be pretty harmonious, but I do also think that opposition, which is power and struggle, opposite ego, means that we are going to have to fight a little bit to begin with. So since this is talking about big picture events, I don't want you to worry about how this is going to affect your chart. I couldn't give a flying what it does for my chart. I don't really care. I've looked at it and I'm like, it's not going to affect me. You know why it's not going to affect me? Because these are outer planets. Outer planets are things you see in the media, things that are external that maybe you have to react to, but it's not like your personality. It's not you're going to wake up and think, oh, I feel itchy. It doesn't really work that way. So it's not something I would really be too bothered about. And I think it's so uber specific because of the sextiles and trines that the degrees would have to be hitting very specifically anyway, you know, for it to be like, oh, that's affecting something in my natal chart. So don't worry about it. Don't be like, I'm a Taurus rising and I don't know what this means for me. It doesn't matter, okay? This is mundane astrology, so we're looking at big picture events. Now, what I think this is going to do, because I don't think we're going to wake up tomorrow and be like, everything's amazing. We need to start asking ourselves some questions. We need to ask our political leaders, you know, people that create the structures, these kinds of questions, or as a collective and a community. So the first thing I'll be looking at, was particularly with Jupiter in Leo, is the themes of creativity, confidence, and visibility, because Leo really likes to be visible. So where in my life am I putting on a mask and playing a role when actually I could be visible and I could be authentic? Where am I holding a lot of ego, right? Where do I feel that people need to give me validation? Do I need to care about that anymore, right? The only person that validates is yourself, ultimately. If everyone was wiped off the earth and it was just you, what would you do? This is a really scary question that I always think about. I'm like, if I had nobody around and no one can validate me, what would I do for fun? Would you like create a load of really nice food and eat it? What would you do? Because there would be no one else to be creating content. So you'd be the one that has to create, not consume. So it's really fascinating kind of question, but it's something to think about because we are really in a overly consumeristic society. With Pluto in Aquarius, we're looking at systematic structure. And because of the nature of Aquarius, which is very hard to pin down, how we use technology in strategic ways for the collective. And, you know, again, how we have social structure. Maybe it's naive, but I still think it's bizarre that we have to pay for fruit and water. It's just odd. Like, why? Why are you paying £2 for a mango? Just why? It's just odd. It's odd. It's very strange to me. And also, I found out recently that bottled water is actually mostly just tap water. So there you go. I just find it so strange. So the questions to be asking there is, which structures in our community or in your life specifically do you think really need to be transformed? You know, I think the big ones are the economy and healthcare, because we can't have people living in poverty. It's ridiculous. And we can't have people waiting in A&E, dying of sepsis because they're waiting for a day or two, right? So those are the big things that need reforming, because also when you fix the economy, you can fix healthcare and vice versa. Surely there's other things as well. I'm not going to limit that, but those are two things that come to mind as like big systematic changes that I believe that every country really needs to implement. And then also we need to look about where is power concentrated, because we have power concentrated in very few companies. I'm not going to say what they are because I don't want a sniper shot, but you know, I do think that it's very obvious what companies own a lot of things. One begins with B and the other R, you know? So I do think there's quite a lot of things that really are affecting us and they need to be restructured. I'd also ask myself, where in my life am I being dishonest? You know, where are we all being dishonest with each other? Where is it like, if you were just honest with me, tell me how it is. And I think that's really interesting when like you go to work and someone says, how are you? And you're, oh yeah, I'm good mate, thanks. But really you want to say, fucking dying inside and you don't care. Why are you asking me how I am, right? And then I have to look at Uranus and Gemini. So this is about that big mental breakthrough, you know, the shifts in technology and communication and data. You know, a lot of people are having their data spread around unknowingly because they don't read the terms and conditions. I know a friend who did a PhD in terms and conditions, and basically the hypothesis and the end result of the thesis was that no one checks the terms and conditions, which we all knew anyway, but kind of fascinating to do a really big mass study and be like, nobody reads the small print. But even so, data should not be sold and you should not have to worry about where your data is going. And, you know, Uranus and Gemini also brings really big new ideas. So what narratives and stories are we telling ourselves that need updating? Even in sort of like entertainment, the stories that keep getting told over and over again, where can we be original, you know? Uranus is about originality. So how can we have original stories and original ways of communicating with each other? How can we ask those questions that we're scared to ask? And how is your intelligence and your thought pattern, your thinking being disrupted by modern society, and how can that be changed? Because there's nothing worse when you feel like you can't think thoughts. Now, there is a culture at the moment where you get policed a lot for what you say, and you kind of have to tiptoe to the point where you're walking on eggshells, and then you can't be yourself, and you get people say, oh, you're so reserved. And it's like, yeah, because if I wanted to have a bit of sense of humour or whatever, I'd get told off. And I'm not saying that people should be offensive and be rude and whatnot, but I think it's a point where, you know, I have seen people just say something very casual and it gets turned into something. It's like, oh, so you think this? It's like, did she say that though? And you know what I mean, right? Where it just becomes a little bit too ridiculous. There's always a fine line between, yeah, you shouldn't say that, it's a bit rude, with you're picking at straws here because you just want to be mad. Then we look at Neptune and Aries. So the theme here is spiritual action, because Neptune is very larger than life. It acts a bit like Jupiter, and it's the collective consciousness. So this is about our values that are actually in motion. You know, there's literally on wheels. And how can we bring that compassion, empathy, and things that are hidden in the subconscious mind into the world, again, that Jupiter and Leo visibility. So the question to be asking is, how can I really enact change with what I believe in, you know, our morals and our values. You know, if I believe in this thing, if I really want to be a staunch vegan, how can I let everyone know that we should be vegan? Something along those lines, right? Or how can I let people know that this company is screwing so many people over? How can I start letting people know these things? How can I act on what I truly believe in my soul and actually feel honest and courageous enough to do so? Because remember, Aries is very courageous. It's ruled by Mars, all about confidence and literally the bravery of the warrior. Then we've also got, where do my spiritual values need to be sort of clearer? Again, we don't have Saturn in the mix, so the boundaries are not super flashing, but I think Neptune can be important when it comes to spiritual boundaries, because there is no boundaries with Neptune really, because it's so foggy and so larger than life that it's kind of like walking through a misty haze and you don't know where you're going, and you're kind of trying to find the wall, and it's like, okay, I found the wall, but then like, where is the ending of this freaking room? So it feels very confusing. It's one of those things that I think out of the whole basket we need to focus on the most is Neptune, because it's so hard to pin down. And together this creates a reset, a new era, right? And this is how we can all put this together, each individually. And it does take courage, it does take time to think about these things individually, and then talk to your peers and your friends, put it on social media, build a collective, make sure that people know about this. But remember, it's also an energetic shift as well. So again, we're not going to wake up and it's like everything's perfect, but we might feel like we really need to have these conversations. And when Pluto went into Aquarius, we started seeing people getting exposed. P. Diddy, we had that CEO that was shot. You know, there was a lot of things where it's like, okay, power structures are trying to be reinvented. We have a cost of living crisis, which is ridiculous. Every time I go to the shop, I pay £30. It's just like two things. It's like, what's going on? I've hardly bought anything. So I do think that needs to be rebuilt pretty immediately. And also I think that July onwards is not going to be, again, like the start of Utopia. It's going to be more like, this is the start of a big workshop where we all have to work together to really push this on. And again, this is super rare. And I think it's something that, again, it's not something where I'm like, oh, I'm really going to be shouting off the rooftops about this, because I think we already know we're moving towards things. You know when you can't take it anymore, and you can see it with people who are dogged down and they say, I can't take this anymore. And again, you just don't want someone flicking your face all the time. You want to have a bit of peace and a bit of calm. Now, I mentioned about it's not going to affect you personally, but how can you actually start implementing this beyond the questions I've just talked about? Well, again, notice where you give people power and authority when you shouldn't be. Where do you sort of say, yes, master, okay, master, oh, sorry, sir, you know? I think you need to understand where you have self-doubt, where you have avoidance, and where you maybe try to be people-pleasing too much, particularly with Neptune and Aries. And notice where you're sort of holding too much control on other things. Do you feel like you're a control freak with certain things? It's about getting the balance. You're not giving your power away and you're not holding it and harvesting it. Also look at your relationship with social media. Are you on your phone too much? Do you feel like you rely on social media? Again, if there was nobody in the world, it was just you, and you had no social media because no one was creating content, how would you feel? I think a lot of people would say I would just, but honestly, would you feel free? Would you be like, I could do anything I want, you know? And in this particular hypothetical environment, animals still exist. Because I always say, like, if animals were there, that's fine. This is just people. Like, if you had a dog and horses and a farm, I think people could get on with that. But if no people, how would you react? Because there would be no one creating content. And let's say that you didn't have a phone either, because there would be no one to contact, because why would you care? Right? So it's one of those hypothetical questions to think about, and it can put you in a bit of an existential crisis actually, but it's important because I think we do rely on technology far too much. Also focus on the stories that you're telling yourself, the negative beliefs, you know, do you believe that you can't have XYZ? Like, I spent the weekend with a friend in Italy, and it was really fun because we were just being super delusional with each other. And the word delusion is interesting. I always say to be realistic is to be mediocre. I don't really care if someone's like, yeah, like that's ever going to happen because XYZ wants this too. Well, I don't care because I'm the most powerful person in my reality, just like that person's the most powerful in their reality. Our realities do not click, right? That's the point of having your own reality. So in my reality, why not? The only reason why not would be me holding myself back, right? So I think that's also really fun to say, where am I holding these really strong limiting beliefs? And where am I holding resistance to it? Like, why do I have resistance? Probably because you're scared of it. Because if you got it, you'd have to be like showing up to it, and also you would be validated or rejected or whatnot. But again, do we care about that? It's just all these questions that you really need to think about, because I think it stops you from manifesting. It stops us from having a positive society. So overall, I think this is a really interesting transit. I think it's a very interesting transit to ask the final question, you know, what kind of structures can I change in my life? And ultimately, how do my core beliefs and my actions translate into real world change, you know? And how we can be contributing to it. And again, it can be small things like, I'm not going to buy from this company, or because morally I don't agree with them, or I'm not going to listen to this artist because all they do is, you know, exploit their audience, or, you know, I'm not going to sit around a coworker that's being super negative anymore because it's draining me, and because I know that powers that be feed off negativity, so I'm not going to give the bastards the satisfaction, right? So it's all about how we can start moving towards this new era, but we do need to actually enact change, Jupiter opposite Pluto. In order to have abundance and have that really nice, you know, gorgeous look in our life, we do need to have change. Now, it does remind me of an interesting event that took place to me a couple of years ago, which I wrote about, but I never actually published. I was going to put it in a book, but I was like, it's interesting. I was actually going out for my birthday to a floating bath, which is like filled with salt, and you sort of float, and it's meant to be like you're back in the womb. And it was a really uncomfortable experience, actually, because I just felt I was itchy all the time. Because of course salt gets in cuts and stuff, and you got little paper cuts and things everywhere. You're like, oh god, this feels really uncomfortable. But I did think about something before I went into the bath, which is that the guy on reception, who was super lovely, super spiritual, because it's a very spiritual place, this homeless guy came in and started being really violent and aggressive with him, and he was being very calm, but at one point I thought it was going to get really physical. And I used to do martial arts, but this guy was pretty big and he was on something. And when people are on drugs, particularly things like cocaine and fentanyl, they have power that you just can't, they're just like really strong. They have like enhanced super strength. If you ever speak to like security guards or bouncers, I always say like, it's crazy how strong they can be. So I was like, okay, I don't really want to deal with that, you know, I'm a little girl. But I saw this big Himalayan salt lamp that had like curved edges, and I just thought, immediately in my mind, I thought, in order to protect the peace and safety of everybody, I'm going to have to do something violent. And it reminded me of astrology, actually. It's interesting how I always kind of connect it back to this event with that. If you want peace, you want to protect, you want things to be okay, you want order to be restored, unfortunately it does require aggression. Because people always say, oh, you know, in order to get peace, you can't fight. I'm an Aries South Node, right? I'm always going to say we have to fight. Like, sometimes people do need whacking around the head and saying, don't freaking do that, you know? But it's not because I wanted to be aggressive, but because I realised that I'm going to have to use something spiritual. A Himalayan salt lamp is spiritual. I'm going to have to use something spiritual in an aggressive manner in order to protect spirituality. And I find that really fascinating when it comes to astrology. So yeah, everything sort of links back to that. I just thought it was an interesting aside with like how I feel about this basket and, you know, the story as a whole.